The Appalachian Mountains are some of the oldest in the world, and we just happen to live in them. One thing we can tell you, there are ghosts in the mountains. Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Ghosts in the Mountains. I am your host, Caleb Hanks, who is a little more sunburned than he would really like to be. And helping soothe my burning skull this evening is my wonderful friend and co-host, the great Count Austin Burgess. You're a count now.
That works for me. I'm adding to my resume here.
Yes. He was a doctor, he was a captain, now he's a count, and we're going to see, hell, maybe next time it'll be accountant. But thank you for joining us on another edition of Ghosts in the Mountains. Last time you left the gang here, we were being total idiots, and we were like, hey, you know what would be fun? Now that we've been talking about this Fletcher Cemetery, well, let's just go there. And maybe to some of your excitement, we did just that. We went to the Fletcher Cemetery, and we were able to witness some incredibly historical graves, one being the needle that sews the thread through most of the information here on this podcast, the one and only Fred Seeley of the infamous Seeley's Castle. Austin just rolled over there and found it.
Yeah, I stumbled upon a nice, it's a pretty decent-sized gravestone, but it's kind of tucked away under the oak tree there.
Yeah.
Unassumingly.
It's beautiful. I think it was more beautiful when Fred was buried there because I doubt that the Ingalls was there.
Yeah. He has this nice nightlight across the way there.
Yeah. You can see what's going on from the vantage point of Fred Seeley's grave, but the vast majority of the rest of the graveyard was unlit, very spooky, super cool, very surreal to go over there after last week's episode where we talked all about that.
It's a nice balmy night too.
Oh,
nice
God. Yeah.
Nice and humid. It fit the description of all those stories that we were telling last week. So it's like, well, here's our opportunity, right?
Couldn't have been any better. Among other things, and, I'm putting together a little bit of a video that I'm going to throw onto the Patreon for our Patreon subscribers of our short but fun adventure over there. Unfortunately, we were not really bringing a lot of high-powered flashlights, so a vast majority of my footage was just dark and us talking, which, for podcast stuff, that actually kind of works out.
It kind of gave us the preliminary scouting for trying to do some of these actual field investigation videos in the future.
Yeah, and a somewhat historic moment because that was me and Austin's first together pseudo field investigation. So
yeah, there you go.
Yeah, we got that one down and we got more on the way. But probably the most important thing to come out of that entire trip was maybe the best idea that we've had the entire time we've had this podcast. See, Austin and I decided that there is a place that is more horrifying and haunted than anywhere in this entire town. It's the abandoned Beef O'Brady's in Fletcher. But we're going to bring it back to life. We are going to, resurrect Beef O'Brady's, and we're going to do it veggie style because Austin here is an herbivore. And I was like, well, if Austin's going to be my business partner on this thing, we're going to have to compromise. And so, hey, we can do Impossible Beef O'Brady's. We're bringing it back, baby.
I think we need some new branding there. Beef O'Brady's just sounds so worn. I don't know. Bigfoot O'Brady's.
Herb O'Brady. Herb O'Brady's. It doesn't sound terrible.
Yeah.
And unfortunately this week, well, the most unfortunate thing is me and Austin were going to bring back Beef O'Brady's.
That is the unfortunate event of the year.
Actually, unfortunately, it is slightly eclipsed by a couple of things. Number one, unfortunately this week, we have not lost one, but three celebrities One of those being Malcolm Jamal Warner, who played Theo on The Cosby Show back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, he passed away. And then the world was incredibly shocked because just weeks after this giant Black Sabbath final performance and Ozzy Osbourne's final performance as his solo career as well, Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness, has passed away, and the world is still reeling. And then this morning, we get the news that Hulk Hogan, at the age of 71, has passed away. And I think Ozzy was 76. But man, the 80s taking some big blows this week, my man.
Yeah, brother.
Yeah, brother.
That's all I have to say, bro.
Yeah.
I wasn't a huge wrestling fan, but I at least accept that Hulk Hogan was a big part of just 80s and childhood nostalgia for a lot of people. So
100%. Oh, yeah. Well, the universe has gained a few more phantoms, and that is going to lead us right into exactly what we're talking about today. We are talking about a place that is not too far, but baby, let me tell you, it's not only in the mountains. It is a damn mountain.
It is one of the mountains.
It's it's probably one of the more famous mountains around here.
Definitely is.
We are talking about none other than Grandfather Mountain. And there is apparently a pretty strange phenomenon that a lot of people have experienced up there. And we're going to dive into that. But this is a phenomenon that is known as the Phantom Hiker of Grandfather Mountain. Now, I've heard a couple of stories recently that are very, what I would say, just similar in nature to this. And one story, it's going to be a bit of a production because there's a story that has come to our attention that somebody in the mountains here experienced firsthand that is kind of similar to this, but it is very wild. And we want to make sure that when we bring that to the audience that we are able to explore this and make sure that we're giving you the whole shebang. So we're not going to talk too much about what that is now, but eventually somewhere down the road, that will be coming. But I personally am not super familiar with the Grandfather Mountain area. Now, I've been to Boone and areas like that. I absolutely love Boone to death. A lot of my friends went to college up there, so it was like every weekend I was, going back and forth up to Boone. I love that drive. It's super beautiful.
I lived there for a couple years myself.
Oh, cool. Were you in school up there?
I did grad school up there, yeah.
Oh, heck yeah. Dude, that is an incredible place to like just live.
For sure.
It gets so damn cold there.
You ain't kidding.
Yeah, that like being in Boone in the wintertime is some of the coldest I have ever been. But when thinking about this idea of this phantom hiker walking around the craggy peaks of Grandfather Mountain, I think the first thing that comes to my mind when I think of Grandfather Mountain is, well, why they call it Grandfather Mountain. The look of the mountain essentially looks like an old man's facial profile. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, I actually wasn't fully aware of that. I think that there's a lot of other mountains across the U.S. that kind of resemble the profile view of someone either laying down. But that directly influenced the name Grandfather Mountain. It kind of looks like the age face of an old man in the stone, basically lying in a profile view right against the sky.
Yeah. And I personally I don't even know that I've ever been up to Grandfather Mountain proper, but I definitely plan to. I know that my brother was up there not too long ago and he was showing me some pictures of it. But the thing that is really interesting about just if you're going to be hiking Grandfather Mountain is the terrain up there ain't exactly for the faint of heart. There are portions of the Grandfather Mountain hike that I think that are a little off the beaten path, but you have like wooden ladders where you're literally having to like climb up these things to essentially crawl up onto these big ass rocks. And it's not like in places like the Tallulah Gorge where you have like very well built stairs or anything. You are literally crawling up a rickety ass ladder to go.
That is pretty wild.
That is like, that's pretty scary.
Yeah, I didn't even realize that was the extent of it.
And then on top of that, you're kind of playing, I don't know if you ever played this old board game, but you're kind of playing a little bit of like Fireball Island. Did you ever play that?
No.
Fireball Island was pretty great because you had all these little characters where you're like walking up the board and then there's all these volcanoes and little pits and things and they would hold a red marble. And if you did the wrong thing, it would unleash the red marble and the red marble would go down the track and hit your guy off the map.
Oh, it sounds kind of like Mousetrap, I guess.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
But this one was, a treacherous island and
better storyline.
Sure.
Better plot line.
Yeah, then like, we're just going to catch a mouse and that's it. And Nathan Lane is not going to be there. But there are portions of Grandfather Mountain where, you have these big, cool, like swinging bridges and cool stuff like that. I mean, it is a super scenic area.
For sure. The kind of infamous Mile High swinging bridge is the part I always, like on the drive to Boone, when you're kind of going into the Banner Elk area, you could actually see the bridge between the two peaks.
Yeah, for sure. And, although I have not personally been up to Grandfather Mountain proper, nor have I encountered a phantom hiker, well, that's why I have Austin here, because he has done what he usually does. He's gone off the deep end, folks. He is so amped up about the reopening of Beef O'Brady's.
The Grandfather Mountain special at Beef O'Brady's.
See, sorry I keep rambling about random things on this episode, but my thought was you get a big rectangular slab of plant-based Impossible beef, and then you cut it in two places, and then you braid it, so you have the braided beef at Beef O'Brady's. Look, I'm not saying I'm a genius, but I think it would draw in at least between 4 and 5 people.
I mean, those might be optimistic numbers, but I think at least a couple.
If somebody told me there was a place called Beef O'Brady's and they had a big piece of braided beef, you think I'm not going to go in there? All right. That being said, Austin, dude, wild off your just incredible excitement about Beef O'Brady's. Tell me how your excitement has funneled into this episode and this really kind of interesting, cozy, creepy story about this phantom hiker.
Yeah, for sure. Like, Caleb said, I personally haven't been to Grandfather Mountain myself, at least the parts that you have to pay to get into. I think I've driven by, or at least driven up to the gates one time when I was just kind of adventuring on my way to or from Boone. But something that I've been meaning to try to get out to and experience for quite a while, because it really is kind of one of the most storied, and it's really ecologically significant area in the Southern Appalachians in general. So it's got some pretty good significance on top of it being, on top of what you mentioned, one of the most significant peaks in the area, almost 6,000 feet above sea level.
Right.
So geologically speaking, Grandfather's actually an ancient mountain. The rocks of the mountain date back 1.1 billion years, and the mountain itself was formed during a massive tectonic collision around 300 million years ago. And that was essentially what people believe to be the same tectonic forces that created the entire Appalachian mountain range.
That's an old-ass mountain.
Yeah, for sure. They say the Appalachians, oldest in the world. And Grandfather was definitely part of that formation. But since then, erosion has kind of carved out the mountain's dramatic ridgelines and sharp cliffs, and even some of the sweeping valleys that go through that area. So before the settlers even came into the area and nicknamed it the Grandfather, as we kind of alluded to with the face of the man in the mountain itself, the Cherokee actually referred to the mountain as Tanawa, which is the great hawk or fabulous eagle. So they kind of believed that the soaring cliffs and craggy ridgelines resembled the shape of this mighty bird that they symbolically believed to be watching over the land.
Man, that's so much cooler than Grandfather Mountain.
It really is. Like, you find, same with kind of the Klingman's Dome thing. You go and you rename it with some boring name.
Yeah, well, that's what we do.
Hey, maybe Tanawa will be making a comeback. But interestingly enough here, they also believed that there was an entrance to what they considered the underworld somewhere on Grandfather Mountain, which was marked by a spring head and guarded by, you want to guess?
Oh God, I feel like I'm gonna feel so dumb when you tell me what it is, because
it's pretty obvious. It's a pretty low-hanging fruit.
A bird?
The little people.
Oh God, I knew it. That's what I should have done.
Yeah. So I didn't even know, with all the digging that we've done on the little people, specifically over the past month or so.
Yeah.
This area wasn't one that really popped up in my research. So it was interesting when I started digging into some of the history of Grandfather Mountain and the Cherokee significance. There was actually a little bit of lore tied to the little people inhabiting this area as well.
Man, that is crazy. I tell you, one place I would not want to be like living as, a nomadic kind of tribe is up that way, because God,
those winters got to be brutal.
That's what I'm saying, man.
Yeah.
Like it's hard enough when you have like gas heat and things. Like they were some serious troopers back then.
Yeah, and I would assume that this probably wasn't a place that people were really taking refuge in during those cold weather months. This is probably more of a symbolic spiritual place for them.
Yeah.
And obviously, if they have ties to some bit of an underworld passage that might be guarded by the little people. They also said it could be guarded by a Black Panther in some versions of that legend that I saw as well. So probably more symbology, maybe a little bit of a shape-shifting entity type spiritual figure. Who knows? But yeah, that's kind of interesting that the area of Grandfather Mountain had its own history before it was even known as Grandfather Mountain itself.
Yeah. Tanawa?
That's
so cool. I love that.
So, pretty cool. I mean, I get where the name Grandfather comes from, especially when you see this kind of old man weathered face on the side of the rock, but definitely had a little bit of cool history prior to that even.
For sure.
And, the mountain has really been a magnet for explorers with some historical names, having traveled the slopes. Daniel Boone himself was known to have hunted the slopes in the 1760s. Cool. Yeah. So little bit of a lore tied to Daniel Boone in that area. And in 1794, French botanist Andre Macaw, I believe, climbed the summit and declared it to be the highest mountain in North America, which, not quite or even close to accurate. But at least he had some aspirations there. As we've discussed prior, the tallest mountain in this area actually belongs to Mount Mitchell. But if you are familiar with Grandfather Mountain and the surrounding area, it is closer to the Piedmont side of the state. So when you do see this huge peak just kind of rising out of more of the flatter side of our state, that imposing height probably sets a pretty impressive image in your mind, and you probably feel that peak is taller than it actually is.
Oh yeah, well it certainly looks massive, especially when you're like coming up toward Boone and stuff like that.
Yeah, that for sure. Huge. And you have that huge wooden sign that kind of points you in the direction. Yeah, it is cool. So in the 19th century, famed Harvard botanist Asa Gray came to Grandfather Mountain in search of a rare flower. Didn't find it, but he did discover what became known as the vibrant Gray's lily. So there was a little bit of a biological discovery to be found on that trip. Also, John Muir, who is founder of the Sierra Club, also known as the father of national parks, he actually summited Grandfather in 1898 while recovering from a bit of a respiratory illness. And you could probably guess it. He claimed that the fresh mountain air, it healed him.
Yeah, there you go.
So another common theme we've kind of seen running in that. But also cool that someone with such significance like that was trekking out to our side of the country and visiting Grandfather Mountain for its own healing properties, shall we say.
Yeah. So I'm assuming the Gray's lily only grows up in that area or something like that?
I would assume there's probably some other parts of the world it grows in, but I do know because of its kind of unique ecological system, I think they said there's over like maybe 16 different ecosystems or ecological systems that exist within the mountain itself. So it kind of allows species that wouldn't be able to grow naturally in this part of North Carolina to grow with just, being a little higher elevation and probably a little bit of other factors that have allowed them to tailor some of those systems to thrive there.
Yeah. When I was doing the Judicola Rock investigation with the lemur team back in the day, I was really kind of blown away because, we like climbed this damn mountain basically.
Yeah.
And there's these like huge rock faces, and me and Micah were like climbing up the side of them. And I got up there and there were like cactuses growing on the side of the mountain.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, what the hell is a damn cactus doing up here?
I've never seen this before.
It's just weird how
different elevations can trigger some things to grow like that.
Randomly shows up there. Because, if you're walking around the woods down here, on the elevation where the city is, you don't just see a lot of wild cactuses.
Right. Yeah. No, not something super common. So in 1885, Donald McRae purchased the mountain and the surrounding land from William Lenore and began developing what was known as the Linville Valley as basically resort property. His son, Hugh McRae, was elected to head up the Linville Improvement Company, where he was in charge of constructing basically the road that went all the way up through Grandfather Mountain and developed North Carolina's first mountain golf resort.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
And that became a plague throughout the entire place.
Yeah. So then eventually in 1952, ownership of the mountain had officially passed to Hugh Morton, who was the grandson of Hugh McRae, and he transformed Grandfather Mountain into the major attraction that it's known as today. He widened the Summit Road, he added these scenic overlooks, he built the infamous mile-high swinging bridge that we alluded to there, which actually stretches between two peaks at an elevation right at 5,280 feet. So nice little tourist attraction, and that's kind of been on my bucket list for visiting the Grandfather Mountain Park itself.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was always kind of known as more than just a tourist attraction. It's drawn these countless hikers and naturalists that are kind of seeking a deeper connection with the raw wilderness in the area. And in fact, some of the upper trails were actually closed in the 70s after a hiker died of hypothermia trying to attempt to scale the mountain.
Wow.
But thankfully, some local advocates kind of helped reopen the trails, clean them up, and promote just more responsible stewardship of the trails and the ecosystem there. And just knowing what you're getting into when you're going hiking in those situations, especially in those treacherous temperatures that we were kind of alluding to there.
No doubt. But I'm assuming that this particular hiker that passed away is not attributed to the phantom that is seen, because that, I think, is supposed to take place quite a bit before this.
Yeah, we'll get into that a little bit. We kind of touch on that, but yeah, you're spot on with that. So yeah, I mentioned before is 16 distinct ecological zones take up parts of this different Grandfather Mountain State Park area. So
that's wild.
Pretty impressive. You know, everything from temperate hardwoods to high altitude spruce fir forests. Like, Grandfather really is the most biodiverse peak and kind of the Eastern Appalachians.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah. They say some of the remnants of ancient forests still cling to the mountainsides, with some of these ancient trees that have just been there existing in areas that have basically been kind of untouched and untreaded for years on the backside of the mountain.
Yeah, I believe it.
It's home to black bears, eagles, cougars, and was home to even the beloved Mildred the bear, who lived on the mountain from 1968 until her death in 1993. I think from what I could tell, she was basically a little bit of a mascot of the mountain. I think she was pretty domesticated, pretty tame, pretty used to people coming to give her some scraps and food, and she just became this fixation of visiting Grandfather Mountain, which sounds pretty cool.
I watched a video not too long ago about Grandfather Mountain in general, and they had some footage of Mildred on there.
That's cute. Yeah. That's cool. I think I mentioned to you before we started recording. They even have a river otter habitat set up, and I've been promising Adriana to take her for quite a while, so that one's definitely on the list. But I want to see those otters for sure.
Yeah, and man, I've seen otters in the wild quite a few times. I mentioned before when we were talking about, I believe it was our French Broad Sirens episode, where I was up there kind of where the French Broad kind of just pours out of the mountains, and I saw for the first time a wild otter coming down the river up through there. And I was with my buddy Preston. We were like, what the hell is that long thing that just shot down the river? And well, it might be best to not see them in the wild, because do you remember that story just maybe a year or two ago, where there were some women that were tubing? Yeah. And the otters attacked them and messed them up pretty good.
I think they get a little territorial. So
yeah, I believe it.
Understandable. So by the late 1980s, Hugh Morton began working on the Nature Conservancy to protect the mountain's backcountry. And Grandfather was designed as a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve in 1992. But after Morton's death in 2006, his family actually continued to preserve his mission and his vision. In 2008, they sold over 2,600 acres of undeveloped land to the state of North Carolina. And by 2009, the Grandfather Mountain State Park was officially opened.
There you go.
So it is cool that they recognized all the work and all the passion that Hugh kind of had for this area, and understanding that something like the state of North Carolina and working together with some of these conservation agencies was a good way to kind of preserve his legacy and his passion and mission to begin with. So now a lot of these attractions that we mentioned, like all these wildlife habitats and the swinging bridge, they're now operated by the Grandfather Mountain Stewardship Foundation, which is a nonprofit devoted to conservation, education, and sustainable tourism within the official Mountain State Park itself. You alluded to some of the treacherous trails on there. The Grandfather Trail, which ascends the entire mountain, is actually known as one of the most technical hikes in the East, and is definitely not for the faint of heart. So I would almost imagine this is where it gets into some of these ladders on boulder situations that you were talking about.
I'm not super frightened of stuff like that, and I see stuff like that, and I'm like, ooh, I want to go on the dangerous part.
Right?
Sometimes.
A little bit of a thrill.
Yeah. Because I don't know. I mean, it's, you can die, but for the most part, if you're careful, you'll be fine.
You'll be good. So Grandfather Mountain has always been known as this place of stories, from, native visions, this great bird watching at the cliffs, to even the Highland Games that are held annually on the mountain, complete with kegs and kilts and bagpipes, the whole shebang.
Have you ever been?
I've not. I've heard stories and I've seen lots of pictures.
I've wanted to go forever. My parents are kind of obsessed with just like anything that is like of Celtic origin.
Yeah.
And they have like wanted to go to the Highland Games forever. And I keep being like, we can go,
Yeah, right. It's not that far. Yeah.
But that stuff is super cool because they have like the essentially like strongman competition elements where they have guys where they literally pick up a giant tree and they have to like try to flip it, I think is one of the activities or something like that.
Yeah. I've
or it's
seen,
like they're just tossing a whole freaking tree all wearing kilts. I mean, dude, it sounds badass.
So yeah, as we alluded to earlier, the mountain is even home to its own ghost legend. And some refer to this as the spirit of the old man of the mountains. But the most common name that I've seen for this tale is the Phantom Hiker of Grandfather Mountain.
Yep. It sounds spooky, but is it?
I think from everything that I've gathered, which, let's be honest, there's not a ton of documented source information on this, and a lot of it's kind of repeating. Everything I've seen, I think the Phantom Hiker is, well, he's either completely benevolent or just doesn't care, or maybe has an inability to care. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, we'll kind of get into that here. So, according to this story, high up along some of the rugged trails of Grandfather Mountain, particularly near Callaway Peak or McRae Peak, stories have been reported in both these areas. Numerous hikers have reported encountering a chilling and unexplained figure of a man dressed in outdated hiking gear and seen silently moving along the ridgeline. Witnesses often describe him as appearing basically like a normal hiker at first glance. His body appears real and solid, just like any other hiker on the trail. But the reported giveaway that this isn't your typical hiker, that he isn't decked out in your traditional like Patagonia or Gore-Tex hiking gear. This guy's, basically wearing what would be described as old-fashioned work clothes that appear to be at least a century old. Witnesses have described him as a bearded elderly man with a rough, grizzled appearance, and he's always seen with a rough canvas army backpack and carrying a long walking stick. Now, the Phantom Hiker most commonly appears as the evening shadows begin to creep in. He may appear kind of ahead on the trail, sometimes off to the side, or sometimes even past you from behind. But he never says a thing to anyone or even ever acknowledges anyone's greetings. It's almost like the hiker is completely unaware of any other presence. But without warning, he'll then vanish into thin air. Some say he simply disappears the moment he's just out of view, while others have reported seeing him step into this empty space and just dissolve in plain sight. But there's never any sound, no footsteps, no voice, just a sudden presence, and then nothing. Speculation around his identity varies. The most common belief is that he's the lingering spirit of a hiker who met his end on the mountain, possibly by falling, or, exposure to the elements, or even exhaustion from just the harsh terrain in general. So at first, my mind did go to the reported death of hypothermia that occurred in the 1970s, but the era of the Phantom Hiker's clothing suggests that he's quite a bit older than the 70s.
Yeah, no doubt.
And, from everything I can tell, this legend has existed orally, been passed down for at least 50 years from what I've seen commented wise from locals in the area. Others say that he's just the spirit of a man who loved the mountain so much that he chose to stay there after he died. And some even believe the hiker to be the embodiment of the ancient spirit of the Grandfather Mountain itself. Which I think is kind of cool, You see the face carved into the mountain of the old man, and here you have this reported elderly man just wandering the mountains for seemingly eternity.
Yeah.
So with that said, some people kind of believe this is your classic residual haunting, kind of an echo of a final journey endlessly repeating along this trail. But others aren't so sure. They see, that the Phantom Hiker doesn't seem to be bound to one spot completely, and his kind of sudden appearances and vanishing kind of edge into the territory that feels a little bit stranger than just your traditional imprint or window in time type haunting.
Sure.
But whatever the explanation, hikers who have seen him agree on one thing. There's something deeply unsettling about coming face to face with a man who really isn't there, especially when the mountain kind of falls silent all around you as it's happening.
Oh, man. Well, given that these reports are true, I think the weirdest part for me about that would be, imagine you're hiking up there and you see somebody, but you don't hear anything.
Mm-hmm.
You don't hear the crunch of leaves.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
pretty unsettling.
Oh, for sure.
To begin
in itself.
with.
Yeah.
I don't typically look at this report as something really spooky. I honestly kind of just look at it as something really kind of magical and just kind of beautiful, because it's like, number one, in the event that is the afterlife, it could be way worse. You get to just like hike this big, beautiful, kick-ass mountain all the time.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
And then secondarily, like, it's just cool. It's just like this mystical vibe. Just the idea of the story of there's this old hiker that just wanders the mountain endlessly.
Yeah.
It just gives a little bit more mystique to this mountain that's already this kind of larger than life thing. But, even just reading the title, the Phantom Hiker of Grandfather Mountain, that just drums up so many sorry. I'm just like,
you're due for a bleep yourself.
Yeah, I'm due for a bleep. That one like very naturally slipped. So many really cool just images in my mind of almost kind of like Gandalf. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I could totally see that. And, when I first hear this, it almost does seem like this almost too perfect story, like one of these ones that's crafted to enrich the lore of the area, like we talk about. But, unlike a lot of these other popular Appalachian folklore stories, this one really isn't like well published or documented like some of the others. I've seen it in a few collections of books, but it's maybe, 6 paragraphs of information max. And there's some places on the internet that I've been able to find it collected on blogs, or just some of the stories of ghost stories collected from around North Carolina or Western North Carolina specifically. But from everything I've kind of seen, this legend seems to be one that's really been just kind of one that's passed down locally through oral tradition, firsthand encounters, and kind of made its way into documentation that way, as opposed to, one of these folkloric stories that were kind of created, shall we say, by a writer or a journalist or a publisher, maybe someone that never even visited this area in the first place, and kind of used to advance their own careers. This one doesn't seem to be accredited or attributed to one author or source to begin with. It's just kind of one that's existed through this oral tradition and eventually found its way to be documented in a book or blog or however it is today.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because it's like the more publicized it is, the slightly more sus it becomes. When you have something like, something like the Pink Lady or whatever. We've talked about this before, but there's a lot of different folklore that are very, very what I would call Pink Lady adjacent. I've heard of like the Red Lady or the Lady in the red dress and different stuff like that. And it's just like, I know for a fact there are other stories of like ghost hikers and stuff like that. But I do love that this is not a super, super popular one. And I'd be interested to see, when the last time somebody reported seeing the guy.
Yeah, I've kind of tried to dig into some of that a little bit. I think the reportings are pretty sparse. There's just a couple I found online, and it's basically kind of alluding to the same thing I just described in the story, that he's seen along the trail, and then they kind of turn the corner, and that man that just passed him is gone. So it's nothing overly spooky, as you mentioned, but it's just kind of that weird, eerie feeling. But, the thing that's kind of interested to me is the more that we've been diving into more and more of these paranormal cases, specifically around Western North Carolina, I think we're kind of starting to pick up on a lot of these kind of reoccurring themes and elements. And with the Phantom Hiker seemingly kind of completely unaware of anyone in the surrounding areas, it really does remind me of what is known as a residual haunting. And we've described these as almost like an imprint or a window in time, continuously kind of replaying in certain areas. So there's kind of a lot of theories on how these imprints can be created. And I think a common thought is that they're kind of created from this outpouring of emotional or heavy energy, which is often associated with a death. But I don't necessarily think a death has to be involved or tied to every instance of these kind of residual spirits or imprints. or even kind of windows in time. John Keel used the word window area to describe like paranormal hotspots. So kind of like that idea of a window in time to describe that.
Well, it really kind of reminds me of even what I personally experienced over there at Elaine's in the Grove Park Inn, because as I was, there for one of the paranormal conferences, I'm sitting down there in Elaine's at 2:00 in the morning by myself.
Mm-hmm.
And as I described on that episode about the Grove Park Inn, I was sitting near the front door, and almost every 5 minutes on the dot, I would start to see in my peripheral vision somebody entering the room, and then I would turn, there would be nobody there. So what I'm getting at is kind of this idea of maybe it doesn't have to be something that is emotionally traumatic or something, that maybe it's just familiar.
Yeah.
Just a place that somebody liked going, some place that they felt comfortable, this big social hub. And for this particular hiker, that maybe that was just his ultimate happy place, and that's why he's still up there.
True. What kind of sparked in my memory goes back to the Reynolds Mansion episode with the story of the little girl being on the top of the stairs, and the people being like, "Hey, who's the little girl?" And
man, that one does creep me out.
Yeah,
because perfectly honest,
and she was completely unaware of them. Like it was just this loop stuck in time playing there.
Mm-hmm.
It's like with this, I think that it's kind of enough of a common occurrence that I just kind of wanted to dive into some of these theories on how these potential imprints kind of might be created.
Yeah.
And just see what else there is information wise on that. And what I found is, spiritual imprints or residual energy are believed to be neither ghosts nor spirits themselves. They're more like basically a recording stuck in autoplay. They always remain in the same location, but some of them are more likely to play back at particular times or when conditions are more favorable to trigger that occurrence. Spiritual imprints seem to be permanently imprinted on the local environment, and parapsychologists call this term the stone tape theory because these imprints seem to be recorded in the building materials or the rocks themselves. They are most often left behind because of what we alluded to earlier, just intense negative emotional turmoil involved in the events that occurred in that area. Have you heard of the stone tape theory?
I have definitely never heard of that.
It's a term that I'd come across before. I just hadn't really dug too much into it. Just being blunt, because it is an idea that's considered pseudoscience because there is no testable conclusions to be based on this.
Yeah.
But the idea itself, it's kind of interesting. It's an interesting theory that these spiritual imprints are not spirits themselves. And, I get where the crossover kind of comes in because sometimes they do appear as almost like an apparition type form. So it leads people to believe that it might be a sentient, ghostly figure. But at the same time, they're just kind of here appearing at the same place, often the same time of day, repeat the same behavior over and over, never changing their routine. So kind of leads people to believe that these are not sentient beings and have really no awareness of their surroundings, showing no intention to their own. It's just kind of like an old after image that's just kind of stuck in the area that's somehow triggered by certain events.
Yeah, and it also kind of, I know that this particular style of haunting is something that is a bit different than what you're talking about, but it does have me kind of thinking a little bit about this whole notion of our house was totally not haunted until we bought that chaise lounge, and then everything in the house starts going crazy.
Oh, yeah.
This whole idea of like whether this is just like some sort of strange electrical imprint or an actual spirit of a human being connected to whatever thing. It's weird how there seems to be this correlation between, connection to some sort of material thing.
Yeah.
Whatever that is.
Yeah. So I kind of tried to dive into more of some of the subject material or source material on the stone tape theory itself, whatever exists out there. Keeping in mind, grain of salt, this is technically considered pseudoscience, but there is some good thought that's gone into it. The basic idea is basically that in places with certain kind of rocks, commonly listed as limestone, quartz, and magnetite, but I think quartz is significant for us because we do live in such an abundance of quartz here in the mountains of Western North Carolina.
As far as I understood, quartz can be a bit of a natural capacitor for electricity.
Yeah.
And I think that's like one of the things that it's doing in some of our modern technology.
Like
I know that they put quartz in the cell phones these days. It's weird that it is in nature some sort of conduit for electricity, because who knows, maybe the ghosts are getting stuck in the rocks, dude.
Right.
Maybe the electrical imprint of whatever the human residual soul is can somehow be contained in this, or I don't know shit. Don't listen to me. I'm the guy that's trying to reopen BFO Brady's and Fletcher, all right?
Well, I mean, you're not far off from what the kind of line of thinking is that these rocks like, the limestone or quartz can somehow carry these emotionally charged events to somehow be recorded into the environment. Kind of like how a cassette tape records sound using magnetic particles. This theory suggests that the land itself can hold on to these psychic impressions from the past, essentially. And then just under these right specific conditions, these recordings can almost trigger to play back, which is what some people believe to be, the source of these residual hauntings.
I mean, that's kind of an interesting theory, because before they were recording on tape, they used to record on a very thin piece of wire,
Yeah.
And I remember I was introduced to a guy named Bill Banner, and he was in broadcast here in town for the longest time. I think he used to work with WLOS back in the day. And he had old wire recordings of the Glenn Miller Orchestra that had never been played. And when we went over there
you did tell me about this.
Yeah,
actually.
when we went over there to talk with him, me and Josh Warren, he was showing me all these really weird things. But dude, that is so interesting, because if you think about it, it's like, okay, you can record things on a piece of wire. What if the planet is recording this stuff?
I mean, weirder things have happened.
That's wild.
And this theory actually goes back farther than I would personally think. In the 1800s, figures like Charles Babbage, who's known as the father of computing, basically, speculated that sound and actions might leave lasting impressions on the world around them. So again, this is this preliminary speculative theories, but the fact that someone of that pedigree was making similar hypotheses that kind of ties into what the stone tape theory is, it's definitely interesting. Later, researchers with the Society for Psychical Research, they expanded onto that idea with something called a place memory, and that's a belief that buildings or materials could kind of retain a kind of emotional or energetic fingerprint from intense moments in time. And it wasn't till the 1970s that the idea got named the stone tape theory, thanks to a BBC horror film literally named The Stone Tape. And the movie made the concept kind of more popular among paranormal investigators and ghost TV shows alike. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah,
we'll have to dig that one up.
For sure. So, I think supporters of this theory often cite the first law of thermodynamics, and that the idea that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, only changed. And they use that as kind of the basis for this theory, thinking that if human emotion is some form of energy, it's not just vanishing when it gets released. Maybe it somehow sticks to these certain places.
Yeah.
But, as I mentioned, there's zero scientific evidence that rocks can actually record or replay memories or emotions or anything. So geologists and skeptics alike point out that stone just doesn't behave the same way that a magnetic tape would.
I bet Dr. Dan Caton would be sitting here listening to this shit like, you boys are idiots.
Hey, at least I'm pointing out that there is no scientific basis for this. So yeah, critics call it pseudoscience dressed up as technical sounding language. But, I think it's more of a metaphor than a theory itself. I think that the ideas are there, very, maybe not hashed out fully, but I think it's an interesting concept.
Maybe it's a science that we don't have the tools yet to quite understand, but maybe there is something there, and that's the thing about science. We don't know everything about it, and that always leaves the door open for new discoveries. And
exactly.
That's one of the reasons we're doing this podcast, is because we're like, there's got to be something more to this ghost thing.
For sure. So bringing it all back to Grandfather Mountain, in a place that, is allegedly full of quartz with cliffs and sudden fog and these harsh weather shifts, the idea of the land itself remembering something tragic and kind of replaying it fits the feeling that, something's off, especially when you start hearing these stories about hikers seeing that same phantom figure almost on loop for decades and decades.
Yeah, for sure.
So I thought that was a pretty interesting way to bring in and explore another little side that we hadn't gotten too much into with the stone tape theory.
Yeah, that's really interesting. If I have heard the term stone tape, I don't think that I understood the connotation, therefore retained that.
Yeah. So interesting concept, not scientifically proven, but still, I think it's kind of cool. But, as I'm kind of going through more of these stories, pertaining to Grandfather Mountain on the internet, particularly on social media, I start to see something that a lot of the locals in the area started to allude to that I wasn't really finding anywhere else. And that was another ghost story that was known as the ghost of the Yoder horse. So I thought that definitely caught my attention after our first ghost horse stories that we ran into were just last week with the Fletcher Phantom Riders, Ghost Riders.
Dear God.
Here we are 1 week later finding yet another ghost story.
Which makes it the fourth horseman.
The fourth. Oh boy. We're in trouble now.
Oh boy. Oh God.
So I can't really find any like super documented lore on this story outside of basically what are just Facebook comments from locals going back and forth on posts that were originally about the Phantom Hiker of the Grandfather Mountain.
Yeah.
Basically alluding to this other ghost story that they were familiar with in the area. And I couldn't completely infer the entire concept of it, but there was one comment that I think kind of sums up the gist of it. And the comment goes, "My mother was Edith Townsend Puckett. I grew up in the house beside Nellie Yoder. So yes, I heard of the Yoder horse all my life. Mama said that Andrew Yoder's father, Nellie's father-in-law, had a plow horse, and one day when the horse bucked him and wouldn't pull the plow anymore, he became enraged and beat the horse to death. My uncle, Willie Townsend, agreed that was the case. Goldie Danner lived beneath the Yoders and may have heard the same explanation. When Linville United Methodist Church was a little white church beside Jerry Harmon's, I would walk to and from church and remember being terrified on the short walk. But I thought, if Fay Hughes can walk back and forth, so can I. I never heard it, but I do believe the people on the road who said they heard the clop, clop, clop of the horse when no one was there." So, pretty general story on that. I think one person even alluded to saying they heard a version of the story where the horse was headless or the ghost of the horse was headless. Who knows? But another ghost horse story I thought was a nice little tie-in after last week.
Well, it's pretty weird not hearing really anything about ghost horses, and then we get four back to back. Like, what the hell, dude?
All at the same time there.
Super weird.
Yeah. I did think it was pretty interesting also when I was kind of going through the comments. One other person commented, unrelated to the Yoder horse story, but they said, relating back to the story of the Phantom Hiker, he claims he could be my great-grandfather, Alexander McRae, which goes back to the original McRae family of Grandfather Mountain.
Yeah.
But he claims that his grandfather is the phantom that is seen at the McRae Meadows during the ending ceremony of the Highland Games. And another commenter also confirmed that he's heard the story of this phantom appearing during the closing ceremony of the Highland Games for years. So kind of going back and corroborating that, oh yeah, I have heard that story. And the fact that he could attribute this directly to his great-grandfather in the McRae family, I thought was pretty cool. Kind of gives some significance to the historical tie-in as well.
That's weird.
Yeah.
I also found out that I might actually have family up there because a little while back you mentioned Callaway Peak.
Yeah.
I'm related to a whole shit ton of Callaways.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, on my dad's side. That's like,
yeah.
I know some Callaways up in Highlands that I'm related to.
Yeah, maybe so then. I don't know the significance of the name of that peak, but I would think it's safe to assume it probably is named after somebody's last name.
Well, if you ever sit down with my dad and have a Guinness, that dude will tell you there are a ton of Callaways around here. So they've been here for a minute.
Well, fair enough. Might be something we have to dig into here.
The hauntings of the Callaway family.
So that's basically it as far as the haunting elements of Grandfather Mountain that I found. But there's one other kind of cool tie-in or unique weather phenomenon that I did want to mention. Do you know what I'm talking about here? Did you see anything of this? Okay. So on January 26th of 2020, this unique weather phenomenon occurred at the mountains and attracted attention of people far and wide. And it's something called lenticular clouds. You know what I'm talking about?
I've heard of them.
Yeah.
Those aren't the sprites, are they?
No, these are more, they basically look like a flying saucer, just a big UFO-shaped cloud.
Okay.
Is the best way I could describe them. They form over the mountains, creating this kind of, it's a pretty otherworldly appearance. So I've seen them called lens clouds, but they're formed when these strong winds blow either over or around some of this rough terrain, creating this white glaze of frozen fog. The lenticular clouds at Grandfather Mountain, they were seen for at least 40 miles away, and people who saw them were pretty amazed and bewildered, not really knowing what was going on. As I mentioned before, the clouds resembled a UFO, and the one over Grandfather Mountain was really no exception to that. It was actually a local Linville photographer that captured the popular image of the clouds on the mountain, and he said that he didn't know what he was looking at first when he saw it. He said the sky reminded him of a scene from Independence Day, the movie, when the invading alien spaceship appears over the major cities and kind of blots out the sun. And he's like, I don't know what's going on with this.
Yep.
So, as air moves across Earth's surface, it hits all these sorts of obstacles like mountains and hills and sometimes even buildings, but it just disrupts the natural airflow, creates a bit of turbulence, and forms these swirling pockets of air that are sometimes called eddies. Now, when the moist and stable airflow kind of goes over this large obstacle, such as a mountain, these eddies can trigger into what we just described, these lenticular clouds. On the downward side of the mountain, it can generate a series of stationary waves into the environment, and if the air cools enough at the crest of one of these waves to reach the dew point, the moisture condenses and then forms the lenticular cloud. And, they're pretty cool to look at, honestly. And if you don't know what you're looking at, you could definitely see how they at least resemble a UFO. I don't think you're, gonna make the mistake most of the time, but because they're, they typically form near mountains and not flatter areas, some people kind of go their whole lives without ever seeing this phenomenon. So the fact that it did occur here at Grandfather Mountain, even if it was just once, I think it's pretty cool. And it's probably something that I would assume occurs more than once, but just the conditions were just right for the photographer to capture that image on that day.
What's the big mountain that everybody thinks there's alien?
Shasta. Shasta's known. That is like
they have them all the time there.
Shasta has lenticular clouds all the time. Yeah. And that's the thing, like lenticular clouds have kind of become associated with kind of these UFO or paranormal hotspots because of places like Mount Shasta that have them. Even Mount Blanca in the San Luis Valley of Colorado is known for lenticular clouds kind of hovering over there, which is another UFO hotspot. I will say some of the more imaginative UFO types actually believes that the clouds themselves are part of the UFO phenomenon, that they kind of are used to conceal the actual craft in some way. Yeah, for sure.
There's a nope hiding in there.
I can't say I endorse that theory, but they're pretty cool to look at.
Yeah,
so
I agree.
But yeah, I thought that was another interesting, not quite paranormal tie-in, but at least paranormal adjacent tie-in.
If nothing else, it just makes the allure of the mountain cooler.
Oh, for sure.
Well, that's awesome, man. And as far as the haints and the hauntings and the UFO-shaped clouds of Grandfather Mountain goes, man, unless you got anything else to bring to the table.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much everything. But I will say, for a topic that didn't have a ton of documentation or source material, I think it turned into a pretty fun episode to, again, not only tie back to something alluding to the Cherokee Little People, but also gave us the opportunity to dive into some cool other topics that we wouldn't have had the opportunity to discuss otherwise, kind of like the stone tape theory or even the concept of lenticular clouds themselves.
Oh, no doubt. And I think that just like the overall just vibe of everything that's going on at Grandfather Mountain, everything about it just makes it an interesting place. The mountain itself is huge and very craggy and treacherous looking. There's all this interesting lore about it. You've got this kind of, I don't know. I really just love the whole vibe of the Phantom Hiker thing. That's just such a cool little thing. But it's, you've got all these little things, the Highland Games taking place up there, a natural area that eagles hang out. Now, that might not sound as weird to people, but we don't have like a ton of eagles around here.
Yeah, just the biodiversity is so diverse there.
Yeah. I mean, I know for a fact that up at Black Balsam, which if you're unfamiliar with the area, this is essentially a place that's a couple of miles up past Mount Pisgah, but golden eagles every once in a while would be up through there. But eagles are not something that you see very often here in the mountains, and I just think that that's a really, really cool thing that they just hang out up there.
Right.
But all that said, Grandfather Mountain in itself is a very well-known place, but I think that when you dive into this and you're finding that there are little nods to things like the Cherokee Little People and all of the just little random kind of things that compile this kind of just like diverse lore, this diverse habitat that's up there, it just makes it an even more interesting thing rather than like, hey, there's this big kind of crazy mountain up there and the hiking's really wild. There's a lot of other stuff going on that you might just not know about.
It enriches the lore.
And that's exactly what we like to do here at Ghosts in the Mountains. And that being said, we just want to thank all of you, as always, for tuning in and checking out what it is that we're doing. I am so happy that we got to dive into some of this stuff with Grandfather Mountain, because a phantom hiker being able to spend potentially eternity walking across one of his favorite beautiful mountains, I'm hoping that is why he's there.
Or just a recording stuck on loop. Who knows?
Either way, it's a really beautiful thing, and it's really cool, providing that this is true and people really have seen this person. But all that said, we want to thank you so much for listening to Ghosts in the Mountains. Your support has been incredible, and we would like to continue creating this program for you and bringing you more and more ghost stories that you may or may not have ever heard of before. If you want to find out more about what we do, you can go to ghostsinthemountains.com. If you'd like to support the show, you can subscribe to us on Patreon, where you will get access to an ad-free version of the show and also, some video of me and Austin running around in a graveyard talking to ourselves, which, that was honestly really fun.
Pre-production. We'll get more of those in the future going.
Yeah, exactly. But until next week, where who knows what we'll dive into. Thanks again for listening to Ghosts in the Mountains. We'll see you next time. And you people and ghosts and hodags and Sasquatches, stay spooky.
I bet Stephen Greer believes there's aliens in lenticular clouds.
You know what I bet Stephen Greer believes in?
Beef O'Brady's.
Us in our incredible adventure to go down to Beef O'Brady's in Fletcher. We're going to get a necromancer and 14 sides of plant-based beef, and we're going to bring this baby back to life. And let me tell you, when I say we're bringing a baby back to life, I'm not kidding. We're going to have plant-based cows. We're going to have cows made out of plants, and we're going to make the baby back strip there, and we're going to braid that beef. I'm really sorry. I'm really, really sorry, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Come to Beef O'Brady's in Fletcher. I'm bringing it back, baby.